All right, folks. Ready to dive into a topic you're going to see on those UPSC exams, I guarantee it.
Oh, absolutely, a big one.
We're talking about the All India Muslim League.
It's a fascinating one, too. Lots to unpack there.
Yeah, we're not just going to, give you the basic history lesson here, dates and names.
Right, got to go deeper.
We're going to really unpack how this organization went from advocating for Muslim rights, within a unified India to ultimately becoming the driving force behind partition.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How did that happen?
Huge shift. And I think really crucial for understanding Indian history, Indian politics, especially if you're aiming for those top marks in mains and even scoring some points in prelims.
Absolutely. I mean, the League's story is, well, it's kind of a case study in how political landscapes change and how, really analyzing those factors, those shifts, it's crucial.
Okay, so let's rewind all the way back to the beginning.
Back to the start.
All India Muslim League, founded December 30th, 1906.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like some overnight thing, right?
No, definitely not.
There were events and movements that laid the groundwork.
Lots of buildup.
I'm thinking about things like the Alagara movement, the Simla deputation. What were those all about?
Right, so these are key.
And how did they set the stage for the League?
Okay, so the Aligarh movement, spearheaded by Syed Ahmad Khan, this was all about promoting modern education for Muslims, encouraging, greater participation in the political sphere.
Okay, so like a reform movement.
Exactly. Social and intellectual reform, aiming to really empower the Muslim community.
I see. And then the Simla deputation, 1906.
Right. So this is where we have a group of prominent Muslim leaders, figures like the Aga Khan.
Oh, wow. Big names.
Meeting with the Viceroy, Lord Minto.
So strategic.
Very much so. This was a strategic move to voice Muslim concerns about representation, safeguards in, the evolving political landscape.
So are we talking about like elite Muslim leaders shaping the League's early agenda?
Exactly. Not so much a grassroots uprising. It's more a calculated effort by influential figures to secure, a place for Muslims in British India's power structure.
Interesting. So their primary concern was representation?
That's right. Ensuring adequate representation for Muslims in legislative councils, government services.
So they're thinking in a system dominated by Hindus, Muslim interests wouldn't be protected without specific safeguards.
That was the argument, and this focus on representation, particularly through separate electorates.
Separate electorates.
Yeah, this becomes a recurring theme in the League's demands.
And something UPSC aspirants should definitely pay attention to. I'm sure it'll be on the exam.
Oh, definitely. But it's crucial to not just know the demands, but understand, the socio-political context.
Yeah, why these demands were made in the first place.
Exactly.
It seems like this concept, separate electorates, initially intended to protect Muslim interests, might have inadvertently contributed to the, solidifying of religious identities as separate political blocs.
Right. That's a very interesting point, and a point that often sparks debate among historians.
Could it have further deepened the communal divide in the long run?
It's possible, while separate electorates address those immediate concerns about representation, they also reinforce this idea of Hindus and Muslims as, well, as distinct political entities.
Instead of citizens with shared interests.
Exactly, and that's a classic example of how well-intentioned policies can sometimes have, unintended consequences.
It's like you're trying to solve one problem and create another one at the same time.
It happens. And for your exams, being able to analyze those nuances, present a balanced perspective, that's key.
All right, so let's fast forward a bit. The Lucknow Pact, 1916.
Okay, interesting period.
We see this, brief moment of unity, maybe?
Could you say that?
Between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League.
They come together.
They even agreed on separate electorates for Muslims as part of their joint demand for greater autonomy from the British.
Yeah, trying to present a united front.
So what was the rationale behind this pact?
And why did it ultimately crumble?
Right, because it doesn't last.
Well, the Lucknow Pact was a landmark moment, no question, in pre-independence Indian politics.
Yeah, it seems significant.
Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak from the Congress, and interestingly, a young Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Oh, wow. So Jinnah's involved in this.
He was, and at this time, he's advocating for Hindu-Muslim unity. They came together, wanted to present that united front to the British. The pact aimed to secure greater self-governance for India. But within the British Empire, it's crucial to understand the motivations of both parties here.
And the context of rising nationalist sentiment at the time.
Absolutely. That's all feeding into this.
So this pact, on the one hand, it's, like a step towards Hindu-Muslim unity.
On the surface, yes.
But it also further entrench this idea of separate electorates.
Right. So it's complex, and it ultimately proved to be a fragile alliance.
It didn't last.
What led to its breakdown? Well, despite that initial show of unity, deep-seated ideological differences and political ambitions, they ultimately led to its unraveling.
Okay, so it was doomed from the start, kind of.
In a way, the Congress, with its broader vision of a united and independent India, gradually moved away from the idea of separate electorates,
Makes sense.
while the League remained fixated on safeguarding Muslim interests through that separate representation.
Okay, so that's a key difference there.
And then the changing political landscape, the rise of new leaders, new ideologies on both sides.
Things are getting messy.
They are further widening that gulf between the two parties.
So understanding those shifting dynamics, that's crucial for the UPSC exams, right?
Absolutely, it's all about those nuances.
This breakdown of the Lucknow Pact seems to mark a turning point in the relationship between the Congress and the League,
A definite shift,
setting the stage for what comes next, which is
not good.
more turbulent times.
And this is where the context leading up to the 1940s becomes really crucial.
Okay, things are heating up.
This period, there are several developments that further shape the League's trajectory and, of course, the entire political landscape of India.
What kind of developments are we talking about?
Well, you have the failure of the roundtable conferences to achieve a consensus on constitutional reforms,
Okay.
coupled with that growing distrust between the Congress and the League.
So it's just getting worse and worse.
This creates a fertile ground for the demand for a separate Muslim state to really take root.
That's a big deal, a separate Muslim state.
A huge shift.
And this is where Jinnah, now the undisputed leader of the League,
He steps into the spotlight.
he kind of goes through a transformation, right?
He does.
From an advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity
Yeah, quite a change.
into the champion of a separate Muslim state.
The champion of Pakistan, eventually.
So what happened? What were those events, those ideological shifts that led to this, dramatic transformation in his stance?
Well, Jinnah, once a staunch advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity, he became increasingly disillusioned with what he perceived as the Congress's unwillingness to accommodate Muslim interests.
Okay, so he's feeling like they're not listening.
Exactly. He argued that in a Hindu-majority independent India, Muslims would be permanently marginalized.
Okay, so he's thinking long-term.
He is, and the rise of Hindu nationalist ideologies further fueled his fears.
Right, so he's seeing that happening around him.
And he came to believe that partition was the only way to ensure the safety and well-being of Indian Muslims.
That's a big decision to come to that conclusion.
It is, and it speaks to how deeply those fears were ingrained.
So from safeguarding Muslim rights within a unified India to demanding a separate Muslim state,
It's a huge shift.
the League's journey is, well, it's an example of how drastically political ideologies can evolve.
Oh, absolutely. In response to changing circumstances, perceived threats, it's all connected.
It's all part of the story.
And this evolution is perfectly encapsulated in one of the most important documents for your UPSC exams.
Here we go. Got to know this one.
Jinnah's 14 points, presented in 1929.
Okay, Jinnah's 14 points. This is practically guaranteed to show up on the exam.
I would say so.
So let's break them down.
All right, so these points represented the League's core demands at that time.
What were they asking for?
Now, what's fascinating and often missed,
Oh, tell me.
these demands weren't inherently about separation.
Really?
They focused on safeguards for Muslims within a united India.
Oh, interesting.
So think federalism, provincial autonomy, adequate Muslim representation in legislatures and services, protection of Muslim religious and cultural rights.
So it's more about ensuring their place within India.
Exactly. And these demands were a response to the Nehru Report, which outlined the Congress's vision for a future Indian constitution.
Okay, so they're reacting to that.
But in Jinnah's view, it failed to adequately address Muslim concerns.
So it's a counter-proposal, in a way.
You could see it that way, and it's
Yeah.
crucial to analyze these points not just as a list of demands.
Right, but as a reflection of something bigger.
Exactly, the League's evolving stance and that growing chasm between them and the Congress.
So were Jinnah's 14 points a genuine attempt at compromise?
That's the question.
A way to secure Muslim interests within a unified India?
Or were they a strategic power play? A way to increase the League's leverage in the political arena?
That's the kind of analytical thinking that's going to help you score points on those UPSC exams.
It is. It's about looking beyond the surface, understanding the motivations.
And I'm sure historians are still debating them.
Oh, absolutely. Whether greater concessions from the Congress could have averted partition.
It's such a big what if.
It is a complex question with no easy answers.
Yeah, history doesn't give us do-overs.
That's for sure. But what we can say for sure is that understanding this historical context, the interplay of demands and responses, that's crucial for grasping the complexities of the road to partition.
It's all connected, right?
It is. One thing links to another.
And this takes us beyond just the Muslim League.
To the bigger picture.
We're talking about communal politics in India.
A broader phenomenon.
This is a concept that's essential to grasp, not just for your exams, but for understanding, Indian society itself.
Absolutely. This is about the fabric of the nation.
So what is communal politics at its core?
Well, communal politics at its core is about mobilizing religious identity for political power.
Okay, so using religion to gain power.
That's the basic idea. It's the idea that religious communities have shared political, economic, and social interests that are often at odds with those of other communities.
So it creates this us versus them dynamic.
It can, and this can have both positive and negative consequences.
Oh, interesting. So it's not always bad?
Not necessarily. It can foster a sense of solidarity, community upliftment.
Right, people coming together.
But it can also breed intolerance, prejudice, and conflicts between different religious groups.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It really is. And that brings us to a critical question for our UPSC aspirants. How did this play out in the Indian context?
That's a great question. Let's break that down and explore some key historical examples in the next part of our deep dive. Don't go anywhere, because this is just the beginning of our journey into the complexities of the All India Muslim League and communal politics in India. And if you're finding this helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. It really helps us get the word out to other UPSC aspirants like yourself. Welcome back to our deep dive into the All India Muslim League.
And all those complexities of communal politics in India.
Last time, we led off talking about how communal politics,
it's about more than just religion, right?
yeah, it's about using religious identity as a tool.
For gaining and maintaining power.
And that can have both unifying and divisive consequences.
Absolutely. That duality is, crucial to understand.
Especially for those aiming to crack the UPSC exams.
It's not about making judgments. It's about analyzing that historical context, understanding the complex motivations.
So let's look at an example.
Okay, a good one.
The Khilafat movement in the early 1920s.
Right, a pan-Islamic movement mobilized Indian Muslims in support of the Ottoman Caliphate.
Deeply rooted in religious sentiment.
It was, but it also brought Hindus and Muslims together.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just about division.
Not at all. It was a shared struggle against British imperialism.
So a common cause, even transcending those religious boundaries.
Exactly. It challenges that simplistic notion that communal politics always leads to division.
Right, because it can be more nuanced than that.
It definitely can.
But then on the flip side, we also have examples like the rise of Hindutva.
An ideology that envisions India as a Hindu nation.
So that raises some important questions. How did the rise of such, exclusionary ideologies,
On both sides of the religious spectrum, yeah.
how did they impact the socio-political landscape of India?
And how did it contribute to the hardening of those communal lines?
Right, because those lines are becoming more and more defined.
These are excellent questions, and the answers are really key for understanding those complexities leading up to partition.
And even the challenges that independent India would face.
Absolutely. Those legacies are long-lasting.
So the rise of Hindutva, with figures like Vinayak Damodar Savarkar,
Championing Hindu cultural and political dominance.
often positioning other religious communities as outsiders.
Right, creating that sense of the other.
And that, coupled with the League's increasing emphasis on Muslim separatism.
It created a climate of distrust, animosity, making a peaceful coexistence seem, increasingly impossible.
So it's like these two forces are pushing away from each other.
And it's essential for UPSC aspirants to analyze these parallel developments, understand how they fueled that communal divide.
It's a tragic irony, isn't it?
What is?
That the very forces fighting for independence from British rule,
Right, they wanted freedom.
they were also contributing to the fracturing of the nation along those communal lines.
It's a complex dynamic.
And let's be honest, we can't ignore the role of the British Raj in all of this.
Oh, absolutely not.
Their infamous divide and rule policy.
Classic strategy.
Deliberately exacerbated religious tensions to weaken the nationalist movement.
They were masters at that.
So for our listeners preparing for the UPSC exams, can you elaborate on how this policy played out in practice?
And its long-term consequences for India.
Because it has consequences even today.
Oh, undoubtedly. The British, they were masters at manipulating those existing social and religious divisions.
For their own political gain, of course.
Always, they'd strategically grant favors to one community,
While stoking resentment in another.
keeping everyone off balance, ensuring that Indians remain divided.
Less likely to challenge British rule.
That was the goal, and a prime example of this is, well, we touched upon it earlier.
Separate electorates.
Exactly, by guaranteeing separate representation for different religious communities.
They're essentially transforming religious identity into a primary marker of political allegiance.
It had a profound impact on the political landscape, hardening those religious divides, laying the groundwork for the communal politics that would, well, ultimately lead to partition.
It's like they planted the seeds of division that would bear fruit long after they left.
That's one way to put it. Their legacy continues to shape Indian politics and society.
Even today. But the story of communal politics doesn't end with partition.
No, not at all.
It takes on new forms, new complexities in post-independence India.
That shadow of partition loomed large.
It's like a wound that never fully healed.
And that unhealed wound, coupled with those challenges of nation building.
It created an environment where those communal tensions could easily resurface.
Precisely. While the immediate post-partition years were marked by a genuine desire, I think, to build a secular and inclusive nation.
It's in the principles of the Indian Constitution.
Absolutely. But translating those ideals into reality.
That proved to be more challenging.
Very much so, despite the best intentions.
Communal tensions continued to simmer beneath the surface.
Occasionally erupting in sporadic violence.
And it wasn't just fringe elements or extremist groups.
No, it went beyond that.
We see mainstream political parties that swore by secularism.
They resorted to communal rhetoric.
To consolidate their vote banks.
It's a disheartening reality.
Political pragmatism trumps idealistic principles.
Often, politicians realize that appealing to those religious identities, exploiting existing anxieties and prejudices.
It was a shortcut to power.
It was, and instead of bridging divides, they ended up widening them.
For short-term political gains, that's a crucial point for UPSC aspirants to understand.
It is how those dynamics of power and political opportunism.
They can undermine even the most well-intentioned efforts.
Absolutely, those good intentions sometimes just aren't enough.
So instead of fading away after independence, communalism took on new forms.
More entrenched in mainstream politics.
What were some of the key manifestations of this evolving communalism?
Well, one of the most disturbing trends has been the increasing mainstreaming of communal politics.
In recent decades, yeah.
It's no longer confined to hushed whispers or backroom deals.
It's out in the open.
In our political discourse, our media, even our social interactions.
It's everywhere.
We see politicians openly making inflammatory statements.
Invoking religious sentiments, sometimes even justifying violence.
In the name of religion, it's eroded trust between communities.
Fostered a climate of fear and suspicion.
And undermined the very foundations of our secular democracy.
It's a dangerous trend.
It is, and for UPSC aspirants, it's vital to be able to identify these manifestations of communalism.
And analyze their impact on Indian society.
Because the impact is real.
It's almost as if communalism has become normalized.
Which is a terrifying thought.
And with the rise of social media,
the spread of hate speech and misinformation.
It's become even easier and faster.
Like wildfire.
Fake news, inflammatory posts, hate speech, they all contribute to creating an atmosphere of hostility and distrust.
So how has social media become this breeding ground for communalism?
It's a good question. It's like a whole new dimension to the problem.
Social media, with its wide reach, the anonymity.
Right, you can hide behind a script.
It's become a powerful tool for communal propaganda, spreading misinformation, demonizing entire communities, mobilizing people for violence.
And it's so fast that information travels so quickly.
It makes it very difficult to control, to counter that hate speech effectively.
And the algorithms, they often prioritize engagement over accuracy.
Creating those echo chambers where extremist views can flourish.
So it's a complex intersection of technology and communalism.
It is, and it's a critical area for UPSC aspirants to explore, understanding how these new platforms are being used both to perpetuate and to challenge those age-old prejudices.
It's a double-edged sword, technology.
It always is.
It can be used for good or for bad.
It's all about how we use it.
But let's not forget that communalism doesn't always manifest itself in such overt forms of violence.
Right. It's not always riots and attacks.
It operates in more insidious ways, through discrimination, prejudice,
the systematic exclusion of certain communities.
from social, economic, and political spheres.
It's about who has power and who doesn't.
And who gets to participate fully in society.
Exactly, and communalism often intersects with other forms of identity politics, particularly caste.
Creating even more complex forms of marginalization.
Deeply rooted, it's essential for UPSC aspirants to understand these intersections.
How those different forms of prejudice overlap and reinforce each other.
Creating those multi-layered systems of oppression, it's not just one thing, it's all interconnected.
So we've explored the various ways in which communalism impacts Indian society.
From the overt violence to those more subtle forms of discrimination.
It's a deeply concerning issue.
It is, and it requires a multi-pronged approach to address.
What are some potential solutions? What do you think could be effective in combating communalism in India?
Well, one of the most fundamental steps is strengthening our secular institutions.
Okay, so going back to the foundation.
The Indian Constitution, it provides a strong framework for a secular state.
But its implementation often falls short.
It does, and we need to ensure that our laws, our policies, our institutions, they are truly neutral when it comes to religion.
Protecting the rights of all citizens equally?
Regardless of their faith, this requires a conscious effort from everyone, political leaders, policymakers, the judiciary.
Law enforcement agencies, every citizen.
We all have a role to play in this.
It's about moving beyond lip service to secularism.
Actually putting those principles into practice.
And that requires not just legal frameworks,
but a change in mindsets.
a shift away from those divisive narratives.
A genuine commitment to building a more inclusive society.
It's a tall order.
It is, but it's essential.
Education plays a vital role in this transformation.
Oh, absolutely. We need to equip young minds with the tools to challenge prejudice.
To critically evaluate information.
To understand that historical context of communalism.
And to appreciate the value of diversity and inclusivity.
Those are essential skills.
It's about fostering critical thinking, empathy, a sense of shared humanity.
That transcends those religious differences.
It's about seeing each other as human beings, first and foremost.
Exactly, and alongside education.
What else? What else can we do?
We need to address those socioeconomic factors that often fuel communal tensions.
Like poverty, unemployment.
Lack of access to education, healthcare.
Yeah.
These create fertile ground for communal mobilization.
Because when people are struggling,
They're more susceptible to those divisive rhetoric.
blaming the other for their problem,
It's a way of simplifying complex issues.
and finding a scapegoat,
So tackling communalism also requires tackling inequality,
creating a more just and equitable society.
where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's a big goal, but it's important.
It is, and we can't underestimate the role of the media in either fueling or combating communalism.
Right, the media has a lot of power.
Responsible journalism that avoids sensationalism, that fact-checks information.
Provides balanced coverage.
That's crucial. The media has a huge influence on shaping public perception.
It can contribute to the problem or be part of the solution.
And let's not forget the power of individual action.
Right, we all have a responsibility.
Each one of us can make a difference.
By challenging prejudice in our own circles.
Speaking out against hate speech.
Promoting interfaith dialogue.
Simply treating others with respect and empathy.
Regardless of their religious beliefs.
It starts with each one of us.
Making a conscious effort to break down those walls of prejudice.
And build bridges of understanding.
It's an ongoing process.
Combating communalism, it's a continuous process, a collective effort.
That requires vigilance, commitment,
And a belief in our shared humanity. It's a battle worth fighting.
for the sake of our nation, for our shared future.
And for those preparing for the UPSC exams, understanding these complexities of communalism, both historically and in its contemporary manifestations, it's crucial.
But it's not just about the exams.
No, it's about being informed, engaged, and responsible citizens.
Who can contribute to building a more just and harmonious India?
That's the ultimate goal.
Well said. Our deep dive into the All India Muslim League and communal politics in India has been, well, it's been a journey.
Through some challenging aspects of our nation's history and present,
But it's also a reminder that we have the power to shape a better future.
where communal harmony and inclusivity prevail.
If you found this deep dive helpful,
Don't forget to subscribe and give us a like.
it really helps us reach more UPSC aspirants and continue these important conversations.
Until next time, happy studying and all the best for your exams.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the All India Muslim League and the deeply complex issue of communal politics in India. We've covered a lot of ground, tracing the league's journey from its origins, its role in partition, and how communalism has evolved in post-independence India. But now let's shift our focus. Let's try to understand the impact of communalism, its
Yeah.
very real consequences, and what can be done to combat this challenge.
It's crucial to move beyond, I'd say, just theoretical understanding. We need to analyze the tangible effects of communalism on the ground, out there in the real world.
Yeah, real-world consequences, that's what matters. And for UPSC aspirants, being able to connect, historical events, ideologies with their real-world consequences, that's essential.
Absolutely. It shows a deeper understanding of the subject matter. You're not just memorizing facts, you're seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. So let's get specific. How does communalism actually manifest itself in Indian society today? What are the tangible consequences? I mean, beyond just political rhetoric and ideological debates, what are we talking about here?
Well, one of the most tragic and visible manifestations, sadly, is communal violence.
Yeah, the riots, the pogrom.
Targeted attacks against specific communities.
This is real suffering.
These aren't just abstract events. They represent the very real suffering of individuals and communities torn apart by hatred and fear.
It's a reminder that communalism isn't just, an intellectual debate.
Right. It has real consequences for real people.
And with the rise of social media, that spread of hate speech, misinformation, it's just become even easier to fuel these cycles of violence.
Yeah.
So how do you see social media contributing to the problem of communal violence? It's like a whole other level now.
It is. Social media platforms, they offer a platform for connection, information sharing. That's the good side.
Right. The potential's there.
But they've also become breeding grounds for hate speech and propaganda.
It's the dark side of technology.
It is. The anonymity emboldens individuals to spread those hateful messages, incite violence, demonize entire communities.
And it's so fast, it spreads like wildfire.
It does, and that speed makes it incredibly difficult to control, to counter. And then the algorithms, they often prioritize engagement over accuracy.
Lead into those echo chambers where extremist views can just, thrive.
It's a dangerous combination, and this is an area where UPSC aspirants can really, shine in their exams by demonstrating an understanding of how technology is being used both to fuel and to combat communalism.
Right, understanding both sides of it.
And suggesting potential solutions. That's where the real critical thinking comes in.
It's a complex challenge. Like you said, technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used to spread hate, but it can also be harnessed to promote tolerance, understanding, and interfaith dialogue.
Absolutely. It's a tool, and how we use it matters.
But we can't forget, communalism doesn't always manifest itself in those overt forms of violence.
It's not always so obvious.
It also operates in more insidious ways, for discrimination, prejudice,
The systematic exclusion of certain communities, and not just from the political sphere.
social economic spheres as well.
It affects every aspect of life. It's about who has power and who doesn't, who gets to participate fully in society, and who's left out.
And who gets to define what it means to be a true Indian, right?
That too, and often communalism intersects with other forms of identity politics, particularly caste.
Adding another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. It's not just about religion. It's about these overlapping identities leading to even more deeply rooted forms of marginalization.
It's like a system designed to keep certain people down.
And for UPSC aspirants, it's essential to understand these intersections, to analyze how different forms of prejudice, they overlap, they reinforce each other.
Creating these multi-layered systems of oppression, it's a lot to unpack.
It is, but understanding these nuances is key. It's about recognizing that these issues are interconnected. They don't exist in isolation.
So we've explored the various ways communalism impacts Indian society, from the blatant violence to the more subtle forms of discrimination. It's a deeply concerning issue, and one that requires, like a multi-pronged approach to address.
What are some potential solutions that you think could be effective in combating communalism in India? Where do we even begin?
Well, one of the most fundamental steps, I think, is strengthening our secular institutions.
Okay, so going back to the basics, the foundation.
The Indian Constitution provides that strong framework for a secular state.
It does, but the implementation, that's where we often fall short. We need to ensure that our laws, our policies, our institutions are truly neutral when it comes to religion.
Protecting the rights of all citizens equally, regardless of their faith.
Exactly. And this requires a conscious effort from all stakeholders. Political leaders, policymakers, the judiciary, law enforcement agencies.
And every citizen, We all have a role to play in this.
Absolutely. It's about moving beyond just lip service to secularism, actually putting those principles into practice in our daily lives.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
And that requires not just legal frameworks, but a change in mindsets.
A shift away from those divisive narratives that we see so often.
A genuine commitment to building a more inclusive society where everyone feels like they belong.
It's a big challenge, but it's essential.
It is, and education plays a vital role in this transformation. We need to equip young minds with the tools to challenge prejudice, to critically evaluate information.